Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Observe It podcast. I'm your host, Daniela. Super excited to have my friend on the show today, Jean Yang. We've known each other for a while, talk about lots of interesting things in our lives, from renovations to pets and other things. Over to you, Jean.
Hi, everyone. Great to meet you. Super excited to be on this podcast.
So tell me a little bit about what you're working on nowadays, Jean.
So I am the head of product on the observability team at Postman. And so you might be wondering, okay, so first of all, what is Postman? We're the leading API platform in the world. What is an API platform? Well, Postman started as a tool that lets you store the requests that you've made. So you make an API request and you figure out finally all of the ways to get the request to work. You can either write it down and use curl again, or you could use Postman's request builder to store it. And then there's a whole host of features built up around this. Like people realize they want to share with their teams. So you can do that in Postman with collections. Once you have a request, you want to do mocking with it. You want to do testing with it. You want to do a whole host of other things with it. And so Postman acquired my company Akita a few months ago as part of their push towards APIs also happen in prod. What should we do with those? And so API observability is a to be defined category, I would say. And so we can talk more about that. But we're helping Postman define what API observability means at Postman. So what we've been doing so far is porting over the technology we built at Akita for dropping in an agent, watching all the API traffic that a software team or organization might have, and then inferring API endpoints from that, and then doing some other things with that. And we've also been doing a lot of, early 0 to 1 product research, again, persona research, just to make sure now that we're part of the Postman platform, we're properly integrating the product, we're serving the users that we intend to be serving, and that kind of thing.
That's awesome. I've known Akita for a while, even pre-Postman, and it's exciting to sort of see your technology sort of go on to a bigger platform, serving a lot more users. One of the first things that sort of struck me when I heard the term API observability and kind of you could go on I think the Postman website right now and look at what it's called. Live Insights is something that you guys have a wait list for. It sounds too good to be true, right? Like what's the magic here? What's the catch? I don't need to like manually instrument anything. I can just like drop the agent. It observes everything. Tell me a little bit more about the magic.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So for us, the goal of API observability was always to give people understanding of their production systems at a higher level of abstraction than traditional DevOps observability. So the idea is APIs are bigger than ever before. To me, APIs are really about making it easier to build. So when I first really got obsessed with this idea of APIs, it was actually okay, I was obsessed with APIs for many reasons and many different ways. But first, I just saw them as kind of a thorn in my side because I was building a lot of tools for software analysis. And anytime you have an API, you call across the network, everything goes out the window. And I'd always be like, oh man, why are people using more and more of these? This is terrible. But the first time I really felt the power of, oh my gosh, this has changed everything is I judged a college hackathon. It was a weekend hackathon. And I remember when I was in college, people would, at the end of the weekend be like, here's my Lego robot. It moves 1 foot. That's what I did back then. And we'd all be like, oh my God, I've never gotten a Lego robot to move more than half a foot. But now people are like, here's my thing that, talks to my bank account, sends me a text message and plays a song depending on the balance or something like that. And it's all possible because you've got these really, really powerful building blocks that are APIs. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is taking over the entire world. Everything is APIs. Service-oriented architecture just means even internal stuff is APIs. And so to me, this is really interesting because what I was seeing was people can build software faster than ever before with APIs, but they actually don't have the ability to understand and maintain those software systems hasn't necessarily caught up. So I don't know if you use like low code or no code tools, but I personally am a really big Zapier user. Like I love Zapier. I love the idea of Zapier. I like make zaps to like DM my team for me and stuff like that. It's really like a thing. But you know, every time I have something more than like 6 or 7 zaps, it just stops working and I turn it off. And so like the way I see like our progress being limited in software in general is we have all this power at our fingertips, but unless people have the ability to monitor their systems, understand what's going on, to be able to like at some finer granularity, um, you know, get deeper in there and find and fix issues, anticipate upcoming issues, you just still can't really build yourself into too much complexity, or you can, and then you get stuck in that, you get stuck in a tree or something like that, you know? And so I was always watching with great interest what was happening in the DevOps observability space with Lightstep, other companies, because I thought, this is sci-fi, this is something of the future. But every time I talked to people about why they didn't use that, they said, well, this is really advanced. I don't really have the time and or know how to set this up, or I don't necessarily need to trace my systems at this level of detail. Or if you look at like a junior dev who just joined a team, how they debug, like most logs don't make a lot of sense to them yet. So to me, APIs are, this is going to sound really abstract, but APIs are a great level of abstraction for communicating back to developers what's going on with their system. Because if you show developers like, hey, like I'm seeing these network packets, and you're like, okay, but what does that mean? It takes like some level of translation in their heads. Or like, hey, like this thing happened. But if you tell a developer, hey, stuff was slow coming to this API when like these values were getting sent, like that starts getting them to a point of like, oh, even if like I constructed this in a very like, in a way without understanding much more, like I can try other things and potentially fix it now. And so where we are now is, hey, this is here's your APIs and stuff breaks at this one. But like where I'd love to go is like, hey, these like these APIs and the values you're sending are sort of just a higher level of abstraction for doing monitoring and observability.
Yeah, so I think you're saying step 1 is understanding what is actually happening, right? What packets are being sent in the system, who's going where, and even understanding that is a big help.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Like which API endpoint exists in the system and are being called, and what types of values are they being called with? Initially, I thought that we were going to be like detecting invariants and like, oh yeah, like whenever this value is called this way, this other value is called this way, and then like whenever like these things are happen together, stuff breaks, but in this very specific way. And the biggest insight that's helped our users with Akita and initially with Postman so far is like, hey, did you know you are calling these endpoints? Yeah,
Yeah, like this exists
yeah,
and this is happening. Yep. Yep. So there is a big part we had spoken about this before. It's like inferring, right? Inferring things, inferring behavior, looking for patterns. When I was working at Lightstep, a big part of what we often talked about was manual instrumentation to sort of help the
yeah.
tool annotate the data so that it's a digestible, it digestible by the end user. Where do you sit in terms of how much of this really should be drop in, automatic instrumentation versus how much effort you think that a developer should put in to kind of help the tool become just like so much more useful by.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's a baseline. There should be something that the tool gives you without much work at all from any software developer. And so at Akita, I set that baseline pretty high. Like within 15 minutes, you should be able to install, and within 5 minutes of that, you should be able to see your endpoints. But past that, especially if people are going to be setting up recurring monitors, or people are going to say like, I care about these endpoints. I don't care about these other ones. Or, I have like a really weird system and I need you to do things in a certain way. Um, there's going to need to be a level of effort of curation in the very least, or shepherding of the developer and the tool. So I think that where I might be in a different position from some of the light step folks is like, I think the upfront effort, I think that should be required, needs to be very, very low, especially if one has the goal of building a very accessible tool. But I think the eventual effort, it's sort of like a you get what you pay for after that kind of thing.
Makes sense. I mean, and we totally agree. I think we also found this out, right, after a certain amount of adoption. Users, kind of like what you were saying before, it's like, I don't really have the time or the energy. I have like a billion other things to do at my job to like put in a bunch of effort. So it sounds like what you're saying is like the initial value has to be high to kind of incentivize the adoption.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, and for us, what we found was, there were users who they would say, "Well, I'm too busy to install this. I need to really figure out my monitoring strategy." And then would say, "Well, just do a half hour call with me if you're not done by the end setting this up." It's on us. This is our problem. I'll never talk to you again. We'll stop bothering you. And a lot of people are really surprised by how easy it can be. And so the point that we want to be in the space is showing people that there is an easier alternative. And so like the analogy I like to make is I actually forgot about this at some point, but I was the friend in my friend group that switched most of my friends onto Gmail. And I think at the time I just was I felt that people didn't realize how much faster and easier email could be until they saw it. And so I would sit next to them and like, make their email address with them and like have them send their first email. Migration is painful. But I knew that, within half an hour, they'd be like, yes, this is the best thing I've ever experienced. And I think that's kind of a that's kind of the experience we want to give people. Think of monitoring observability right now today as something that is maybe you're not always getting a lot if you can't put in a lot. Maybe it's not very accessible, but we're going for is we want to be this paradigm changing tool. I know it's very buzzwordy, but we want people to realize that it could be different and easier. And that's not saying that we're delivering everything that a Lightstep or a Honeycomb delivers, because we don't. Like we don't provide tracing, we don't even provide logs. um but different is sometimes what people need.
Yeah, and I think part of I don't I think I might have mentioned to you part of the motivation for me starting this podcast was that I've been getting a lot of questions, which back when I'm really like sort of ingrained in the observability space, like it might seem like pretty fundamental, right? But now I'm realizing that we talk about this like 99% developer, like most people out there aren't talking about observability or thinking about observability.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I had an interesting moment where I was doing a Twitter Spaces with Charity Majors, and she said, "Well, I think we can both agree that your starter monitoring tool you reach for is Datadog." And I started to say yes, and then I realized, you know what? I tell all of my friends to reach for Datadog, and then I think about the amount of work it took us to set up Datadog, and I say, I think I would just turn on your CloudWatch instead. That's probably all you need until you need X, Y, and Z. And what I found my friends actually doing, I'll tell them, this is what I do. This is what you do if you set up Datadog. This is what you get if you set up CloudWatch. And when I follow up with them, I discovered they have not set up Datadog, because it is a non-trivial investment and it is easier than some alternatives, but people are waiting longer, I think, than before even setting that up.
Yeah, that makes sense. I want to go back to something that you mentioned because the sort of the end user stories are really interesting. The biggest benefits that you've seen users of Akita or Postman sort of get, right? Like, what are some of the interesting or the more surprising things that they find by just like, looking at?
I am Yeah, so I think our first like success story that made us really happy, and a pattern that I really like, is people have Grafana set up. They're getting user reported errors that are not being caught in their Grafana. So it's not in the purview of their Grafana monitoring currently. They set up Akita, and because we what we were able to do is watch all API traffic, infer endpoint structure from that, and identify not just down to like the offending call, but because we were able to collate into this is the endpoint with like path parameters, things like that. We were able to say, hey, you're getting, 98% errors on this endpoint, or, like there's a lot of errors on this endpoint. And so So whenever we find a user who is actively trying to debug an error, that's always a really nice success story. We also have users who just say, look, I like having a tool that helps me keep an eye on endpoints that I didn't necessarily manually monitor or document yet. So we have users that use us alongside Sentry, because, there's, even though like a lot of these tools sound like they should be fairly automated, there's still like the SDK and there's some dashboarding work you have to do with some of these other tools. So people just like having us as a complement. We're also like just at the API level automatically, which is a little bit of a higher level of abstraction than some of the other tools out there. Um, Another story I really like was one user was tasked with launching mostly a pile of contractor code. So he initially used us to figure out what APIs were there, and then just kept using us for monitoring and actually turned off their CloudWatch alert because it was too noisy and wasn't really helping them, and used us in their ops review instead.
That's yeah, that's really great. I think so we use a lot of gRPC internally, and gRPC is nice
Yeah.
because it gives you the spec, right? It gives you the schema, all the things that it has. For our REST endpoints, that's kind of like the wild wild west.
Yeah, 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 yeah. So we only work on REST, and what we found is REST seems to be the one where, people have some really old REST or like non-standard REST. You start to question, is there even standard REST after you see so much REST out there?
Yeah. Well, the restful definition is very flexible. One last area I want to touch upon today, AI, right? So, how do you see that? Do you see any concrete ways that it could sort of change or be integrated into your product in the future?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So for us, we're really about turning API traffic into insights. And I think there's a few ways AI can help us. So actually, for our last hack day, our last internal hack day on our team, my project was to see how AI could help improve our inference of path parameters. So one thing we do is we look at a bunch of endpoints. We say, hey, all of these are actually the same path. And so there are some potential ways we found that AI could help us improve our path parameter inference. I also think that uh, AI ops, I feel like, is kind of a somewhat less popular term in the industry over the past before AI really took off, because people are like, okay, cool, yeah, everyone has thrown unsupervised learning at logs, but what has come of it? I think that a lot of the success of these AI tools is about curation of the data and getting the right level of abstraction again for the data set that you're starting with. I think if you're at the level of logs, it's really hard to detect signal. If you're at the level of API endpoint, it's actually quite a bit more interesting. That was another hack day project by someone on our team earlier this year. We had a friendly AI dog that answered a lot of questions about like what's common to see for this API endpoint, what's not. That was a surprisingly like popular but not as used feature. I've since become convinced that I think chat is not the right interface for for many AI tools, but yeah, I think AI is all about, we now have way more powerful ways to make sense of complex data sets, and production data is a very interesting complex data set. So I think there's a ton to potentially do with it.
So I think that's on the insights part. What about on the like helping me,
Mm.
instrument, helping me give more data to Akita such that I think you're a big fan of Copilot, right?
Yeah, yeah, I really like Copilot. So so we're not really focused on helping people instrument at the moment because we're really focused on the API layer. So I haven't thought about that part as much. I imagine it could help people instrument. I just don't have a sense of like where it could fall down because I haven't personally played with that myself. Yeah, because I feel like it's AI is really good for certain shapes of problems and really not good for other shapes of problems. If I'm just, making stuff up, I think Copilot works really well because the user has a user like I check part of the interaction. I actually think that like the biggest way to help people instrument is to bake instrumentation into frameworks because you like ideally want to abstract away some of that. I think like Copilot is really good for stuff the user kind of like is alert enough to check. I think instrumentation is really hard to check. I mean, unless it's like super boilerplate. I think a lot of the trick with observability instrumentation is actually like having an understanding of like this is like how I want to set up my spans, or like this is like how far apart I want stuff to be. And I think like that, like it's harder to page in than some of the stuff. Like I think Copilot's really good for like boilerplate, for instance. And I think that's like a different cognitive level of checking than spans.
Yeah, takes a little bit more research, I guess, for the judgment to be there for that.
Yeah, yeah, but I think like anomalies, could be great, or just like my like I'm seeing this data, what could be wrong, because I feel like what AI has been really good for is I think my friend planned a date using AI recently where like he had all these constraints like it needs to be like this distance kind of between San Francisco and the peninsula, needs to have these attributes, not those attributes. But you can imagine the same thing for root causing an incident, right? Like it needs to like the data needs to take this shape. I already ruled out like these 5 cases. I know this, I don't know this. What else could be wrong, right? Because I feel like part of debugging and part of root causing is just coming up with stories of what's possible. And so I don't know. Maybe I could help with that.
Yeah, and then ways to test out those theories, right? Okay, so let's leave the listeners and the viewers off with something that you're excited about that's coming up. What can spoilers for what's coming up for you guys?
So something that I'm really heads down on right now is thinking about some of the problems that we were solving with Akita. Were like, how do we get users to curate their API endpoints like while providing a fully automated solution initially, like this thing that we were talking about before. And part of my excitement to integrate with Postman was, well, they have an entire platform for storing and curating API endpoints. And so something we're digging into right now is how can we best leverage that platform? I feel like up to now we've been doing kind of like nuts and bolts, like block and tackle, like technical integration stuff and like basic persona interviews, things like that. And now it's like getting to the interesting part, which I'm really excited about.
Yeah. We have actually internally a few
Oh,
engineers who are
awesome.
huge fans of Postman. So if you ever need more people to sign up for user studies, yeah.
Well, yeah, always looking for users. Yeah, right now we're actually targeting companies with less than 20 engineers, using Kubernetes, EC2, ECS, REST. So like it depends on how much REST you guys have, but yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Awesome. Yeah, I'll volunteer a few of them over your way. So awesome. Thanks everybody for listening. See you next time.
Goodbye.
Bye.